The night in Atlanta was the kind of night that pressed its weight against the windows. Heavy and relentless rain tapped against the cracked glass of Isabella Martin's apartment, each droplet echoing her unspoken fears. The dim glow from a flickering streetlight crept through the blinds, slicing the room into strips of shadow and weary light. Inside, the silence wasn't complete. A small whimper cut through it, a fragile, hungry sound from the bedroom where her son Malik stirred in his sleep. Isabella sat at the edge of her worn couch, her elbows resting on her knees. The tension in her body wound so tightly that it felt as though even her breath came out in shards. The refrigerator hummed in protest from the corner, nearly empty. The formula tin on the counter had been scraped clean hours ago. Tonight, Malik had fallen asleep with a watered-down bottle. Isabella told herself it was enough. She had whispered it into the darkness, trying to make her voice believe the lie. But lies had a way of clawing through silence. They gnawed at her as she stared at her phone screen, cracked her thumb, hovering over the name she knew she shouldn't press. Her brother, Marcus. He had helped before, reluctantly, grudgingly, never without reminding her of the debts between them. But tonight wasn't about pride. Tonight was about her son's hunger, about the emptiness that threatened to swallow them both whole. Her chest tightened as she typed, Marcus, I'm sorry to ask again. I need $50 for formula. Malik's almost out. I'll pay you back on Friday, I promise. Her hands shook as she hit send. She didn't double-check the number. She didn't let herself hesitate. She closed her eyes, pressed her forehead into her palms, and let the world's weight push down her shoulders. 5 minutes later, her phone buzzed. Her heart leapt too fast, too hopeful, before she even picked it up. She expected a reluctant yes, or maybe another lecture about responsibility. What she saw instead made her stomach lurch. I think you meant to send that to someone else. Isabella blinked, sat upright, and stared at the message in horror. One wrong digit. She hadn't texted Marcus at all. She had texted a stranger. Her first instinct was panic, hot and sharp. Her fingers flew across the screen. I'm so sorry. Wrong number. Please ignore this. Embarrassment burned through her, mingled with the shame she already carried. She tossed the phone aside and wrapped the threadbare blanket tighter around herself. Another mistake. Another failure to add to the growing pile. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that 3 states away, in a glass-walled penthouse overlooking Manhattan, the man who had received her message was staring at his phone with the same intensity he once reserved for military orders and billion-dollar contracts. Charles Garcia had built empires out of silence. He was a man who answered to no one, who spoke less than he thought, who trusted only what numbers could prove. His private phone never received stray messages. It was a line that only family and that list was dwindling ever used. The text was not spam. It wasn't a scam. It was too raw, too real. Noah's almost out. I get paid on Friday. He reread it. Not just words. It was dignity, bargaining with desperation. A mother explained to herself and her brother why she had to ask for help again. Most nights Charles would have deleted it. He lived in a world where mistakes were liabilities and strangers were risks. But tonight, something in those lines caught him, held him. And for the first time in years, he didn't ignore. Is your baby going to be okay? Isabella stared at the screen, bewildered. What kind of stranger followed up like that? What kind of man reads desperation and answers with concern? Her first instinct was to block him, to shut the door on yet another unknown. But the question lingered, unsettling and straightforward. We'll manage. Sorry again. She pressed send and set the phone down, determined to end the conversation. But the response came quickly, as if he had been waiting. I can help. No strings. She scoffed aloud, a humorless sound. Help from strangers was the kind that came with invisible hooks. and she had no room left in her life for traps. "Thanks, but I don't take money from strangers." "Smart policy," came the reply. "I'm Charles now. Not a stranger." Her breath caught. She hadn't given her name, and yet he had offered his. She pushed the thought aside. People didn't just give freely, not in her world. Not in any world she had ever known. Hours later, after Malik drifted back into restless sleep, Isabella sat in the dim quiet, staring at the glow of her phone. She did something she never imagined she'd do. Her hands trembled as she typed, "This is my Venmo." She told herself it was foolish. She told herself he would send nothing or worse, exploit her weakness. 3 seconds later, the phone buzzed. Her eyes widened. She blinked, certain she had misread. But no, there it was. $10,000 received from Charles Garcia. Isabella froze. Her breath faltered. She opened the app and refreshed it twice, as if the numbers might vanish if she looked too closely. $10,000. Her fingers moved in disbelief. "This is too much. I only needed $50. The reply was instant. "It's already yours. No catch. One less thing to worry about." She had not cried when she lost her job. She had not cried when they repossessed her car. She had not even cried when Malik's father vanished after the pregnancy. But this broke her. Tears came hot and unyielding, spilling down her cheeks as she pressed her hands to her face. Not because of the money itself, but because of what it meant. Someone somewhere had looked at her desperation and chosen kindness instead of judgment. Her phone buzzed again. "Take care of Malik." Her heart jolted. She had never told him her son's name. Fear mingled with awe. Who was this man? How had he known? She lay awake, long into the night, staring at the ceiling, at her son's peaceful breaths. The number still glowed on her screen. A stranger, a man named Charles. And though she told herself not to believe or hope, she felt something stir a whisper she had not let herself hear in a long time. That this wasn't an accident. Stories like Isabella's remind us how sometimes the slightest mistake can change everything. If her struggle touched you, if her courage and her son's innocence made you pause for even a moment, I'd love for you to stay with us. Like this video. If it moves your heart, leave a comment to share your thoughts and follow this channel so you don't miss what comes next. Because Isabella's story is only beginning, and what awaits her and Charles is something far greater than they could imagine. The morning came slowly in Atlanta, as though the city was reluctant to rise. A thin veil of gray clouds stretched over the sky, muting the usual warmth of Georgia light. Isabella Martin sat at the small kitchen table, her chin resting in the palm of her hand, her eyes fixed on the cracked screen of her phone. The number still glowed there. A stranger. A man who had sent her $10,000 with 3 words that felt heavier than gold. Take care of Malik. She had not slept, and the night had been a blur of restless pacing, quiet sobs, and the hollow disbelief that clung to her. She wanted to return the money, but she couldn't. She wanted to trust it, but she didn't dare. Every possibility spun through her mind like shards of glass. Was it a scam, a trap, a cruel joke? Or worse, was it real? Malik stirred from the bedroom, a slight sound, and a soft whimper that quickly escalated into a cry. Isabella rose instantly, pushing her thoughts aside as she lifted her son into her arms. His tiny fists balled against her chest, his hunger insistent. She rocked him gently, whispering soothing words, though her heart twisted with guilt. The tin was still empty. The money sat untouched in her account, unreal and untouchable. She couldn't simply walk into the store and spend it. Not until she knew it was safe. Not until she knew who Charles Garcia was. And then came the knock. It startled her so profoundly that Malik flinched in her arms. No one knocked at her door. The landlord sent texts, and the neighbors kept their distance. For a moment, the sound froze her in place. The knock came again, firmer this time. Isabella put Malik gently in his crib, pulled on her faded hoodie, and walked cautiously to the door. She peered through the peephole. A man stood there in a delivery uniform, clipboard in hand. Behind him, stacked high on a dolly, were boxes 4, 5, maybe more, taped neatly, each bearing the label of a courier service she couldn't afford to use. Her heart pounded. She opened the door slowly. "Delivery for Isabella Martin." The man asked, his tone indifferent, routine. She nodded mutely. "Need your signature." Her hand shook as she scrawled her name across the paper. The delivery man wheeled the boxes inside, stacked them neatly in the corner of her tiny living room, and left without another word. The door clicked shut, and silence returned. Isabella stood still, staring at the pile of boxes as though they might explode. Her breath quickened. She crouched and began to tear at the tape with trembling fingers. The first box opened with a sigh of cardboard and revealed cans of infant formula. Sturdy, expensive brands she had only ever seen advertised in glossy magazines and online mommy blogs, more cans than she could have bought in months. The second box held diapers, wipes, bottles, tiny clothes with tags that felt foreign beneath her fingers. She never would have chosen soft fabrics and colors, but somehow felt like gifts chosen with care. The third is organic puree packets, jars of baby food, and delicate teething toys shaped like animals. When she reached the fourth, her hands were shaking so badly she had to pause. She pressed her palms to her eyes, whispering, "Oh my God, oh my God." At the bottom of the last box, beneath the soft tissue paper and padding, lay a small envelope. Her name was written across it in a hand that was steady, deliberate. She opened it carefully, pulling out a single card. He should have what he needs. Malik deserves better than barely getting by. Charles. There was no logo, return address, or phone number. Only a signature she did not recognize from a man she had never seen. Her chest tightened with something she couldn't name. Gratitude, fear, suspicion, all tangled together. Who was this man? What did he want? She sat on the worn carpet, Malik's cries softening as he lay in her lap with a new bottle, full and warm, for the first time in days. She held him close, her tears falling silently onto his soft curls. Hours passed before she touched the boxes again. They sat in the corner of the room like a dream she didn't dare wake from. When Malik finally fell asleep, Isabella found herself at the table again, the glow of her phone lighting the shadows. Her fingers hovered uncertainly over the screen as she opened a browser and typed Charles Garcia. The results filled the screen faster than she was ready for. Charles Garcia, CEO of Genova Tech Industries. Her stomach dropped. Net worth $14.7 billion. A man who had built an empire on biomedical patents, whose name was whispered in boardrooms and financial magazines. The press called him elusive, private, untouchable. There were only a handful of official photographs. Charles, walking out of a Senate hearing, his jaw set and eyes cold. Charles at a charity gala, unsmiling, tall, white, severe. They called him the ghost mogul because he avoided interviews, avoided attention, and avoided everything that made billionaires household names. Her breath trembled. This wasn't just a stranger. This wasn't just luck. This was him, the man who had sent her money, had sent her boxes of things she had no way of repaying, and had signed a note for her son as if he knew him. She stared at his photograph. He didn't look like kindness. He didn't look like the sort of man who would notice someone like her. He looked like the kind of man who lived in a different universe, where people like Isabella only existed in statistics. And yet, there he was. Her phone buzzed. Her heart lurched. "Why are you doing this?" she typed before realizing what she was doing. The message had already been sent. She wanted to delete it to pull it back from the air before it reached him. But the dots appeared 3 minor marks pulsing in silence. "Because I know what it's like to lose someone you can't save. And because no child should ever feel that kind of pain." The words struck her like a blow. They were not poetic. They were not polished. They were true. Her throat tightened. "I don't want your pity," she typed back quickly. "It's not pity. It's recognition." She leaned her head against the wall, closed her eyes, and let the silence stretch. Recognition. A word that carried more weight than she wanted to bear. The following morning, Isabella exited her apartment to find another package at her door. Smaller this time. She carried it inside with trembling arms, Malik babbling against her shoulder. Inside was not a formula, not diapers, but a single object, a soft gray blanket embroidered with her son's name. Malik. Her knees weakened. She sank onto the couch, burying her face in the fabric. It smelled faintly of lavender, fresh and new, untouched by hardship. This wasn't a chance anymore. This was something else. Her phone buzzed. "Do you work?" The question landed like a stone in her chest. She hesitated, fingers still tangled in the threads of the blanket. "I did before the company folded, before daycare closed. I studied biochemistry, but now—" "No, not right now." The reply came without pause. "What was your field?" She exhaled. "Diagnostics, research. I interned at Novagen before everything got complicated." There was a beat of silence. She expected it to end there, expected him to disappear back into his world of skyscrapers and billion-dollar contracts. Instead, "Come to Genova Tech tomorrow at 11 a.m. Ask for Ava. No strings. Just a conversation." Her heart stopped. She stared at the words at the name of the company that owned half the biomedical patents in the country, at the invitation that could not possibly be meant for her. "You're offering me a job?" she asked, the disbelief plain in her words. "I'm offering you a chance to take one back." Her phone slipped from her hands. She pressed her palms to her face, her breath shallow. Malik stirred, reaching for her, grounding her back into the present. A chance. That's what he had called it. A chance to step back into the world she had lost, a world she never thought she'd see again. But why her? Why this man? This billionaire stranger? This ghost who lived in glass towers and shadows? She looked around her apartment. The peeling paint, the stacks of unpaid bills, the boxes in the corner that still felt too unreal to touch. And for the first time in years, hope, fragile and frightening, stirred in her chest. The morning of Isabella Martin's visit to Genova Tech began with nervous silence that seemed to seep into the air around her. Atlanta's gray skies had broken open, spilling golden light over the cracked sidewalks and the rows of brick apartment buildings that leaned tiredly into each other. The world outside felt alive and ordinary, yet nothing about this day was ordinary for Isabella. She stood in front of the small mirror nailed crookedly above her dresser. Her reflection stared back, dark eyes framed by fatigue, her deep brown skin glowing faintly under the soft morning sun that crept through the blinds. Her hair was pulled back neatly, though a few curls escaped rebelliously at her temples. She had dressed in her cleanest jeans, a thrifted blouse she'd ironed twice, and the one blazer she owned, the same blazer she had once worn to interviews 2 years ago, before Malik was born, back when her future still seemed like something she could hold in her hands. It pinched slightly at the shoulders, reminding her how much her body had changed since those days, but it would have to do. Her hands shook as she adjusted the baby carrier strap, where Malik rested against her chest. He gurgled softly, unconcerned, reaching for the silver chain around her neck. She caught his hand, gently pressing it to her lips. "Just for today, Malik," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Let's pretend we belong." The ride into downtown Atlanta was a blur of shifting thoughts. The bus rattled down Peachtree Street, its windows smudged with fingerprints and rain streaks. Outside, the city's towers rose higher, with each block mirrored surfaces catching the sunlight in sharp, dazzling fragments. Isabella clutched the strap of the carrier tighter. She couldn't shake the feeling of being a trespasser, of stepping into a world that was not meant for her. When she arrived at Charles Garcia's address, she stopped short. The Genova Tech Tower loomed above her like a shard of glass thrust into the sky. Its surface shimmered in silver and steel, reflecting the skyline in itself. The entrance was a wide arc of glass doors, flanked by security guards, who looked more like silent statues than men. Businessmen and women swept in and out with the polished ease of people who belonged to the rhythm of success. Isabella swallowed hard. She could feel the weight of every wrinkle in her blouse, every scuff on her shoes, every whisper of poverty clinging to her. As if sensing her hesitation, Malik stirred and pressed his cheek into her chest. His warmth steadied her. She drew in a breath and stepped forward. The glass doors opened automatically, ushering her into a lobby carved out of light. The floors gleamed in pale stone, polished to a mirror finish. High ceilings stretched above her, traced with beams of natural light streaming through skylights. A soft hum of efficiency filled the space. The click of heels, the murmur of voices, the subtle whisper of papers shuffled behind sleek reception desks. Isabella's throat tightened. She felt smaller than she ever had. "Can I help you, ma'am?" The receptionist looked up, a woman in her 30s with a warm but professional smile. Her eyes softened when they landed on Malik, whose wide gaze darted curiously around the glittering space. I'm here to see Ava." Isabella managed her voice low. "My name is Isabella Martin." Recognition flickered across the woman's face, unsettling Isabella even more. "Of course," the receptionist said brightly. "You're expected on the 37th floor. Miss Lynn will meet you at the elevator." Expected. The word reverberated inside her like a bell. She hadn't been expected anywhere in years. She followed the discreet signs toward the elevator bank. The glass walls caught her reflection as she passed an image of a young woman holding her child, trying to look steady, while the ground shifted beneath her. The elevator doors slid open as though waiting just for her. She stepped inside, her heart pounding, and pressed the glowing button for the 37th floor. The ride upward was too smooth, too fast. Each floor number lit up with quiet precision, marking her ascent through the building and into a life she could scarcely imagine. Malik babbled, pressing his small hand against the cool metal panel. She kissed the top of his head, breathing in the familiar scent of his baby shampoo. When the doors opened, a woman was waiting. Ava Lynn introduced herself with a graceful nod. She was in her 40s, sleek black hair pulled back into a chignon tablet, balanced effortlessly in one hand. Her tailored suit fit like it was designed only for her, but her eyes carried a warmth that slightly eased Isabella's tension. "Mr. Garcia is in meetings at the moment." Ava explained, her voice both professional and kind. "But he asked me to show you around and ensure you're comfortable." Isabella followed her down a wide hallway lined with glass offices. Behind the transparent walls, men and women typed rapidly, voices murmured in phone calls, and screens glowed with charts and data. Everything hummed with quiet efficiency. "I'm not sure what this is," Isabella admitted at last, her voice soft, uncertain. "This whole thing feels like a setup for a punchline." Ava's lips curved into the faintest smile. Mr. Garcia doesn't do punchlines. He does precision. They stopped before an expansive conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The skyline stretched out like a sea of glass and stone. Ava unlocked the door with a swift motion and pushed it open. "Mr. Garcia told me to show you this first," she said. Isabella stepped inside. Her breath caught. It wasn't a workspace. It was a nursery. A crib stood in the corner draped with soft blankets. A small changing table sat beside it, stocked neatly with diapers and wipes. Plush rugs softened the floor, scattered with toys in cheerful colors. Even the windows were fitted with blackout curtains. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth. Tears pricked her eyes before she could stop them. "He thought it might help you feel more comfortable," Ava said gently. Every detail was considered. Isabella turned, her voice breaking. "Why? Why would he do this?" Ava's gaze met hers steadily. "Because he knows what it feels like to walk in alone." The words sank deep into Isabella's chest. She had no reply. 20 minutes later, she sat in a smaller meeting room, Malik asleep in the carrier beside her. The room was quiet, sunlight spilling across the polished table. She gripped the edges of her chair, steadying herself. The door opened, and there he was, Charles Garcia. Seeing him in person struck Isabella harder than she expected. Photographs hadn't captured the way his presence filled the space. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his tailored suit cut sharp against the lean lines of his body. His face was striking strong jaw, piercing blue eyes that seemed to hold both storms and silence. There was a faint stubble along his jawline, like he hadn't slept enough. He looked exactly as the world described him, a man who had built empires and lived above the noise of ordinary life. And yet, there was something else, something the photographs hadn't shown, the weariness in his eyes, the kind that came not from lack of sleep, but from years of carrying burdens too heavy for one man alone. "Isabella," he said, her name rolling from his tongue as though it was familiar already. "Thank you for coming." She stood awkwardly, unsure of what to do with her hands. "I wasn't sure if I should," she admitted. "You came anyway," he said. "That's what matters." He sat across from her, resting his forearms on the table. His gaze was steady, piercing, but not unkind. Before discussing anything, he began, and I wanted to clarify. "You owe me nothing. This isn't a test. I'm not here to rescue you." Isabella blinked, startled by the directness of his words. "I don't believe in charity," he continued, "but I do believe in investing in people. And I saw something in you, Isabella, something worth investing in." Her throat tightened. She had prepared herself for suspicion, judgment, and whatever hidden price would come with his generosity. But not this. "Why me?" she whispered. For a long moment, Charles looked down at his hands. Then he lifted his eyes back to hers. "Because you didn't ask for a shortcut," he said quietly. "You didn't expect anything. You were willing to go without, before you let your child suffer." "Someone like that?" His voice caught faintly, as though on a memory. "Someone like that is rare. And someone like that, I would trust you with anything." Isabella's breath stilled. Charles slid a folder across the table. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was an offer, a temporary position in Genovatech's finance audit department. 3 months, flexible hours, pay more than fair. She stared at the number on the line, blinking back disbelief. It was more than she had earned in 6 months at her old job. "This is real?" she asked softly. "It is," Charles said. Her eyes darted to Malik, still sleeping peacefully in the carrier, then back to Charles. "And the nursery?" He allowed the faintest hint of a smile. "Also real." For a moment, silence stretched between them. A silence, heavy with unspoken things, with questions that neither dared ask yet. Finally, Isabella nodded once. Her voice was steady despite the storm in her chest. "I'll take it." The first morning Isabella stepped into Geneva Tech as an employee, she carried with her not only Malik's weight against her chest, but also the weight of 1,000 insecurities. The city was still shaking itself awake, sunlight glinting off mirrored windows and slick asphalt. She had dressed in the only outfit that could pass for business casual, a pair of navy trousers pressed as neatly as her old iron would allow, and a soft cream blouse tucked carefully beneath the blazer still pinched at her shoulders. Her palms were damp as she crossed the marble lobby. A security badge had already been prepared for her, her name printed in bold black letters beneath the gleaming Genova Tech logo. When the receptionist clipped it to her blouse, something shifted in her chest, a whisper of belonging she hadn't felt in years. She moved toward the elevators, Malik's soft breath warming the sling's fabric. Every step felt like trespassing into a world she didn't deserve. Yet the badge gleamed at her heart, like proof that she had been chosen. The 37th floor opened into quiet efficiency. Ava Lynn greeted her as though she were a returning colleague rather than a stranger. "Good morning, Isabella," Ava said. Noah's space is ready, smoothly, correcting herself almost instantly. Malik's space, of course. The words caught Isabella off guard. She had not expected such seamless accommodation, nor the absence of judgment in Ava's voice. The chief of staff guided her down the hall to the glass-walled nursery she had glimpsed days before. Inside, Malik cooed, as though the room had been built only for him. He wriggled happily on the rug, his tiny fingers clutching at a plush giraffe. Isabella's throat tightened. For once, she could set him down without fear. He was safe here. "And your office is right next door," Ava said, ushering her into a modest but sleek workspace. A wide desk gleamed in the center, dual monitors glowing faintly, as though already waiting for her touch. The chair was so ergonomic that it felt like sitting in a cloud. "You'll have full access to our audit systems. IT has prepared your logins. Let us know if you need anything." "Anything," Isabella murmured, still disoriented by the ease with which doors opened in this place. "Anything within reason," Ava replied with a faint smile. Isabella sat slowly, her hands hovering over the keyboard. For a long moment, she breathed, letting the machines hum and the nursery's faint laughter seep into her bones. It had been over a year since she touched an internal audit system. She feared she would have forgotten everything. But as the files unfolded before her spreadsheets, invoices, reconciliation logs, something long dormant stirred awake. Her mind began to click back into rhythm, recognizing deviations, patterns, numbers that whispered truths others overlooked. It was like brushing dust off an instrument and remembering how the melody went. She worked quietly, stopping only when she felt eyes on her. Lifting her gaze, she found him there. Charles Garcia leaned against the glass partition sleeves, rolled up his presence commanding even in silence. He did not knock, nor announce himself. He watched. Settling in, he asked at last. Isabella glanced at the monitor. "I haven't broken anything yet. Give it time." His lips curved faintly, the barest ghost of a smile. Her pulse quickened. She turned the screen slightly, showing him the open folder. "I'm starting with the third quarter reports. Some vendor payouts don't align with project records." Charles tilted his head. "You found that already?" She shrugged. "They're not well hidden." His expression shifted, no surprise, only thoughtfulness. "Anything feel off to you?" She hesitated, her fingers tapping lightly against the desk. "I've only been in the system an hour. But yes." Either someone's rounding in ways that make no sense or hiding something in the noise. His jaw tightened slightly. He leaned closer, his gaze locking with hers. You don't have to dig deep yet. Start at the surface level. Isabella murmured, her chin lifting almost defiantly. But I don't do surface level. A beat of silence stretched. Then Charles nodded once. Neither do I. And with that, he left, leaving her with a racing pulse and an unease that was not entirely unpleasant. By afternoon, Ava appeared again, this time carrying a tray. She said you didn't order lunch, setting down a plate of grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and a glass of iced tea. Eat, you'll need it. Isabella blinked, startled by the gesture. In her old jobs, no one had ever cared whether she ate. She had been invisible, disposable. But here, someone had thought of her. She ate slowly, savoring each bite until her screen pinged. A new message. Keep this just between us. If you find something that doesn't look right, bring it to me. No one else. Not even Ava. Understood. Her breath caught. She glanced instinctively toward the door, half expecting Charles to be there again. But the hall was empty. Only the message glowed on the screen. Her fingers hovered. You expect me to find something? The reply was immediate. I expect you to see things others won't. Her heart thudded. She sat back, staring through the glass at Malik. He was curled up on the rug, asleep, with the giraffe tucked under his chin. Sunlight traced the soft edges of his hair. For the first time in months, Isabella did not feel she was chasing life from behind. She was catching up, maybe even stepping into the place she was meant to be. By the end of her first week, a rhythm had taken shape. Mornings began with black coffee. Malik's forehead kissed before she set him in the nursery. The days flowed into hours of spreadsheets, reconciliations, and audit trails. She approached the work not as a lifeline, but as a mission. Her precision was unrelenting, her focus absolute. And on Friday afternoon, she found it. It wasn't a smoking gun fraud, rarely was. But there was a pattern. The same vendor name appeared scattered across multiple departments. The amounts varied. $1,200 here, $2, $400. There, always under internal thresholds that would trigger automatic reviews. On the surface, they blended into the background noise of legitimate transactions. But Isabella's trained eye saw the truth. These payments were routed to project codes that did not exist. Her stomach tightened. Someone inside Genova Tech was siphoning funds slowly, strategically, almost elegantly. She copied the vendor code into a private folder and encrypted the file. Then she sent a message. I need 5 minutes. It's important. Charles's office overlooked half the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline in twilight hues of gold and violet. He sat at a desk stripped bare, except for a single tablet, a leather notepad, and a photograph turned slightly toward the wall. When Isabella entered, he glanced up. You found something? She nodded, sliding a flash drive across the desk. It's not confirmed, but it's enough to raise questions. He plugged it in, scrolling through the files. She watched his expression shift, first concentration, then confirmation. You pulled this from Q3, he asked. Yes. But it spans earlier quarters. The vendor doesn't exist. Payments route through a shell account in Delaware, masked under smaller invoices. Charles leaned back, exhaling through his nose. You're right. It's clean. Too clean. Which means whoever did it knows the system. Knows it well. You already suspected something, Isabella said quietly. His eyes met hers. I've been watching the numbers drift since last year, but finance dismissed it. Too subtle, too easy to explain away. Then why not hire an outside firm? A pause. His jaw clenched. because I don't know who I can trust." The words landed like stones in Isabella's chest. She knew that kind of isolation that hollowed you out and made trust a dangerous luxury. "So what now?" she asked. "I want you to keep digging," he said, quietly. "No names. No email trails. If anyone asks, you're reconciling back-end billing records." She tilted her head, her voice steady despite her pulse quickening. "You're asking me to investigate your own company. I'm asking you to find the truth." Their gazes held. The silence between them deepened thick with the weight of something unspoken. "And if I find something ugly?" she whispered. Charles did not blink. "Then we deal with it." That night, Isabella lay awake in her small apartment, Malik asleep beside her. She stared at the ceiling, her mind replaying every word of their conversation. She wasn't afraid of digging. She wasn't even scared of what she might find. What unsettled her most was the look she had glimpsed in Charles's eyes, the look of a man who already knew the answer but needed her to bring it to light. It was not just numbers in a ledger. It was shadows in the heart of Genovatech, shadows that were waiting for her to chase them down. And she would, for Malik, for herself, and maybe though she wouldn't admit it aloud for him. The days at Genovatech began to blur into a rhythm Isabella had never imagined herself part of. Mornings in the tower carried their music, the quiet thrum of servers hidden behind walls, the brisk steps of executives, the hushed conversations that spoke of billions with the same ease others used to order coffee. For Isabella, each day started with Malik's laughter echoing through the nursery before she sat at her desk screens flickering to life under her touch. She had thought her skills might have rusted with time, dulled by months of survival and exhaustion. But no, her mind sharpened again with every report, every ledger, every line of numbers that unraveled beneath her eyes. And yet beneath the hum of progress, shadows stirred. The vendor anomalies she had uncovered grew into patterns too deliberate to dismiss. Transactions routed through shell accounts in Delaware, scattered across departments always timed at the edges of quarter reports. It wasn't carelessness. It was a strategy. She documented everything carefully, and her notes were meticulous. At night, when Malik slept, she carried her laptop to the kitchen table in her tiny apartment, the glow of the screen the only light in the room. There, away from the polished walls of Genovatech, the numbers told her darker truths, and she was not the only one watching. Charles Garcia had a way of appearing when she least expected him. He never announced himself. One moment, she would be buried in spreadsheets, and the next his reflection stretched across the glass wall of her office. "How far have you traced them?" he asked one evening, his voice low. She glanced up, startled, her hand still hovering over the keyboard. Malik slept in the nursery next door, his small chest rising and falling peacefully. 3 departments so far, Isabella admitted. The amounts aren't significant on their own, but together, over months, they add up to millions. Charles's jaw tightened. He stepped inside his presence, filling the small office. "Do you have a suspect?" "Not yet." Her voice softened, careful. "But this isn't random. Whoever's behind it knows your systems intimately." He didn't reply immediately. He turned, staring out through the glass at the skyline, as though the city itself might answer. "I already have a name." Isabella's pulse quickened. "Who?" He turned back to her, his eyes darker than she had ever seen them. "Victor Hayes." The name landed between them like a stone. Victor Hayes, Chief Financial Officer. Isabella had seen him only in passing, an elegant man in his mid-40s, his suits pressed to perfection, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone who knew power bowed to him. His smile was practiced, almost charming, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. Now, with Charles's words echoing in her ears, every memory of Victor shifted. His lingering gaze when she passed him in the hallway. He spoke to others politely, but he edged with dismissal. "Why haven't you confronted him?" she asked softly. Charles leaned against the edge of her desk, the fabric of his suit brushing the wood. Too close, too steady. Because proof is not suspicion, and Victor is careful. He covers his tracks. "And you want me to find what you couldn't?" Isabella whispered. "Please, confirm what I already know." His gaze locked with hers, "Because I trust your eyes more than anyone else's." Something in his tone made her chest tighten. Not just trust in her skill, something deeper, something unspoken. It didn't take long for Victor to notice her. By the second week of her quiet investigation, Isabella felt the weight of eyes that lingered too long, the silence that shifted when she entered a room. Once late in the evening as she left the building, she caught sight of a car idling across the street. Its headlights flared briefly when she stepped onto the sidewalk, then dimmed, as if retreating into the dark. Paranoia, she told herself. But the unease settled deep. Inside, Genovatech Victor's presence became more pointed. He appeared in the finance wing more often than his schedule required, leaning casually against door frames, his smile too thin. Once he stopped at her desk, Malik gurgling happily in the nursery behind her. He said, "You're the new hire." Mr. Garcia seemed so fond of his voice, smooth as silk. "Quite a rare privilege bringing your child into these walls." Isabella forced a polite smile. "I'm grateful for the opportunity." Victor's eyes flicked toward the nursery, then back to her. "Yes, opportunities are fragile things. They don't last forever." The words lingered long after he walked away. That night, Isabella stayed late combing through procurement records. The office floors above and below had emptied, but Charles's lights still glowed down the hall. She found herself walking there, flash drive clenched in her fist. His door was ajar. He stood at the window, the city spread beneath him in shards of light. He seemed carved from the same glass and steel for a moment, untouchable, solitary. "Charles," she said softly. He turned. For the first time, she saw something raw in his expression, something that stripped away the billionaire armor. Weariness. "You shouldn't be here this late," he murmured. "Neither should you." They shared a quiet smile, brief and almost reluctant. Then she held out the drive. "You were right. The approvals tie back to Victor's team, but not directly. He's using ghost credentials and duplicating logins to cover the trail." Charles took the drive, his fingers brushing hers briefly. The contact was electric, startling in its simplicity. He studied her, his eyes searching. "You realize what this means?" he asked. "That he's stealing from you," she said. "That he's preparing something bigger." Silence pressed in around them. The city lights flickered below, but inside the office the air was still charged. "What do you want me to do?" she asked finally. Charles's voice dropped. "Keep digging, quietly, and if you find something I can't ignore, bring it to me. Only me." The following days unfolded like walking a knife's edge. Isabella worked with precision, concealing her investigation under the guise of reconciliations. Yet she felt Victor's gaze like a shadow pressed against her skin wherever she went. One afternoon, she stepped into the cafeteria, Malik's carrier balanced on her hip. Conversations faltered for the briefest moment. Executives glanced her way, curiosity sparking. Who was this woman who moved through the company's heart with a child by her side, protected by the CEO himself? Whispers trailed behind her, but Isabella kept her head high. Malik babbled, reaching for her hair, grounding her in the most straightforward truth: she was here for him. For them. Across the room, Charles entered. He didn't look at her immediately, but when his gaze finally found hers, the noise of the cafeteria dimmed. There was no smile, no overt acknowledgement, just a steady unspoken connection that lasted a heartbeat too long. Victor was there too. Isabella felt his eyes flicker between them, calculating, assessing. His lips curved into that polished smile that never reached his eyes. She turned away, her pulse racing. That night, as Isabella prepared to leave, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Careful what you're looking for. Not every door you open will lead you out. Her breath caught. She glanced around the dim parking garage. Shadows stretched long against the concrete, and the sound of her heels echoed too loudly. Malik stirred in his carrier, his small whimper cutting through the silence. Isabella quickened her pace, her heart pounding. When she reached her car, she locked the doors instantly, her hands trembling on the wheel. The message glowed on the screen like a warning. Later that night, she sat at her kitchen table again, Malik asleep in the next room. She stared at the files she had copied, her chest heavy with fear and determination. This was bigger than her. Bigger than unpaid bills or survival. Victor Hayes wasn't just stealing. He was orchestrating something that could collapse Genova Tech from within. And Charles Garcia. Powerful. Untouchable. Charles had chosen her to stand beside him in uncovering it. She should have been terrified. She was terrified. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. Purpose. And somewhere deep in the quiet corners of her heart, something even more dangerous: trust. The following weeks pressed down on Isabella with a weight she hadn't expected. At first, she thought the unease came only from the files she uncovered, the quiet siphoning of millions hidden in ledgers no one else had noticed. But as the days stretched, she realized it was not just the numbers pressing in on her. It was the presence of Victor Hayes. Victor had always carried himself like a man who belonged at the center of every room. His tailored suits gleamed in dark blues and grays. His cologne lingered like smoke after he passed, and his voice slid easily into conversations he meant to dominate. But now his eyes followed her with deliberate intensity, his comments cutting closer with each encounter. "Miss Martin," he said one morning as she stepped into the corridor, Malik balanced against her hip. His smile was polite, his tone smooth, but the gleam in his eyes sharpened the words. "How fortunate you are to have caught Mr. Garcia's attention. Not many people earn such personal sponsorship." Isabella kept her voice even. "I'm here to work, Mr. Hayes. That's all." "Of course," he replied, tilting his head. "But forgive me, people might wonder. After all, this company is full of qualified auditors. Why you?" His words lingered like smoke even after he walked away. Isabella knew what he was doing, seeding doubt, painting her as an outsider, a pet project of the CEO. And though she carried herself with quiet strength, she could feel the whispers curling around her like vines creeping into cracks. That evening, after the offices had thinned and most lights dimmed, Isabella lingered at her desk. Malik slept peacefully in the nursery, his tiny hand curling around the plush giraffe's tail. Isabella stared at her screen, the glow reflecting in her tired eyes. She startled when Charles's voice broke the silence. "You shouldn't let him rattle you." Her gaze lifted. He stood at her doorway, jacket, gaunt sleeves rolled to his forearms. The weariness of a long day etched his features, but his eyes held only clarity. She said, "I don't know what you mean," though her voice betrayed her. "You do." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The sound felt final, private. Victor's good at playing the game. He undermines with a smile and discredits without raising his voice. It's his art. "And what am I supposed to do?" she asked quietly. Charles studied her for a long moment, then said softly, "You hold your ground. You let him underestimate you, and when the time comes, you let the truth cut through him." The words stirred something in her chest. Not just resolve, but something warmer, something dangerous. She looked away quickly, eyes on the faint scar across his hand where his cuff had slipped. "You speak as if you've fought him before," she murmured. His jaw tightened. "I've fought men like him my entire life." The air between them thickened, full of things unspoken. A few nights later, Isabella left the building later than usual. The parking garage was quiet, the echo of her footsteps too loud in the stillness. She reached her car, fumbling for her keys, when a voice emerged from the shadows. "Working late, Miss Martin." Her chest tightened. Victor leaned casually against a concrete pillar, the glow of a cigarette ember flaring as he took a slow drag. His smile was soft, almost friendly, but his presence in that space was anything but. "Mr. Hayes," she said evenly, her fingers tightening around Malik's carrier. "He said Charles must think highly of you," pushing off the pillar. His shoes clicked against the cement as he walked toward her. "Trusting you with access most employees wouldn't see in 10 years. Must feel empowering. I do my job, and yet you seem to be doing far more than that." His eyes narrowed, the smile never reaching them. "Tell me, Isabella, what happens to people who dig too deep where they don't belong?" Her pulse hammered. She refused to step back. "Do you know what happens to people who hide things they shouldn't?" For a moment his mask faltered, just slightly. Then he chuckled, the sound low and dangerous. "Be careful, Miss Martin, for your son's sake." The words chilled her blood. By the time she slipped into her car and locked the doors with trembling hands, Victor had disappeared into the shadows. That night, Isabella couldn't sleep. Malik lay curled against her side, his breathing steady, but her mind replayed Victor's words on a loop. The warning hadn't been idle. It had been deliberate, a knife pressed just close enough to draw fear. At dawn, she returned to the office early, her determination sharpened by sleeplessness. She dove into the records, relentlessly tracing every ghost login and phantom vendor. The pattern grew clearer, and with it the danger. When Charles entered her office unannounced, she looked up with weary eyes. "You look like you haven't slept," he said. "Neither have you," she countered. Something flickered between them, an acknowledgement of shared exhaustion, of burdens too heavy to name. "I saw him last night," she admitted, her voice low. "Victor. He knows." Charles's expression hardened. "What did he say?" "That I should be careful. For Malik's sake." Silence. Then Charles stepped closer, his gaze unyielding. "He threatened you?" "Yes." The muscle in his jaw clenched. For a moment, Isabella saw not the billionaire executive, but the soldier he once had been, the man who had lived through wars of a different kind. "He won't touch you," Charles said finally, his voice quiet but edged with steel. "Not while I'm here." The certainty in his tone sent a tremor through her. Not fear this time, but something startlingly close to safety. "You can't promise that," she whispered. "I can," he replied, his eyes locked on hers. "And I just did." Her breath caught. For a heartbeat too long, neither of them looked away. But safety was fragile, and Victor knew how to break it. Within days, whispers spread more loudly through the office corridors. Isabella noticed the glances, how conversations hushed when she passed, and some colleagues' smiles stiffened. A rumor grew she wasn't there because of merit, but because of Charles. She was his special project, his charity case, perhaps even more. The first time she overheard it directly, she froze outside the cafeteria. Two analysts spoke in low voices, not realizing she stood near the doorway. Garcia brought her in personally, with her kid no less. "Must be nice," the other said with a smirk. "Imagine skipping 10 rungs on the ladder because the boss takes pity or interest." Heat burned through Isabella's chest. She turned sharply and walked away before they noticed her. Later, she stood at the nursery window watching Malik sleep peacefully in his crib. Her reflection in the glass stared back strong but weary. She pressed her palm against the cool surface, her whisper barely audible. "I won't let them take this from us." That evening, Charles summoned her to his office. His face was taut, unreadable. He gestured for her to sit. "Victor's pushing harder," he said. "I know. The rumors, they're designed to break you." His gaze was steady. "But you're not the one they're after. It's me. He's using you as the weapon." The words sank like lead in her chest. "So what do we do?" she asked. Charles leaned forward, his voice low. "We don't react. We gather. We wait. And when the time is right, we strike with proof so irrefutable that even Victor can't twist it. And until then, he said, his eyes softening as they lingered on her. "You trust me." The room fell silent. The city glowed beyond the windows, a restless sea of lights. Between them, the air thickened with unspoken truths. Isabella nodded slowly. "I do." But deep inside she knew trust was only the beginning. This was war, because it was no longer just a matter of numbers and ledgers. And in war, shadows were never still. The morning sunlight bled through the skyscraper's windows in thin golden lines. But inside Genova Tech's executive floor, the air felt like storm clouds gathering. Isabella walked toward the boardroom with Malik safely left in the nursery downstairs, her heels striking the polished floor with a steadiness she did not feel. She had been summoned no explanation, no agenda. Only an email marked mandatory attendance. The name at the bottom was Victor Hayes. The long mahogany table was already half filled when she pushed open the doors. Executives murmured in low voices. Papers shuffled, screens flickered with the company's quarterly data. And at the far end, Victor sat in his tailored suit posture, sleek smile, razor sharp. "Miss Martin," he said smoothly, gesturing toward an empty chair. "So good of you to join us." She inclined her head, masking the unease clawing at her chest. She sat, every nerve braced, her eyes flicking instinctively to the opposite side of the room. Charles had not yet arrived. When he did, silence fell. Charles Garcia entered the room with a presence that rearranged the air. His navy suit was immaculate, but his expression was sharp, unyielding. He glanced around the table, acknowledging the murmurs. Then his gaze landed on Isabella. For the briefest moment, his eyes softened, and she felt the tension in her shoulders ease. Victor rose to his feet. "Shall we begin?" The meeting unfolded with rehearsed precision. Sales projections, product rollouts, expansion strategies, all the language of corporate warfare. But Isabella knew the real battle was not on the slides. It was circling the table like a predator waiting to strike. And then, Victor struck. "I want to bring up an internal concern." He said, his voice smooth, almost casual. His eyes flicked toward Isabella. "It has come to my attention that some irregularities have been found in our financial audits. Ledgers accessed without authorization. Confidential files reviewed by someone outside our chain of command." The room stilled. Heads turned toward her. Isabella's breath caught. Victor continued, his smile never faltering. "While I'm sure this is a misunderstanding, transparency demands we discuss it. After all, reputations are fragile in a company of this scale." Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak to defend herself, but the weight of so many eyes crushed her voice. Before she could find it, Charles leaned forward. "Enough." The single word carried the force of command. Every head turned to him, the room bending toward his gravity. "Are you implying that Miss Martin accessed files without permission?" Charles's voice was calm, but it cut like steel. Victor spread his hands. "I'm not implying anything. I'm simply stating facts. Access logs show her credentials tied to files from multiple departments. Isabella's chest constricted. She had used those files on Charles's orders, but Victor was twisting it, framing her as reckless intrusive. Charles's gaze never wavered. I authorized her access. A ripple of shock moved through the room. Victor's smile faltered. You what? She works directly for me, Charles said evenly. Every file she touched, because I asked her to. If you have a problem with that, your situation is with me. Silence fell like a gavel. The executives exchanged uneasy glances caught between loyalty and fear. Victor's jaw tightened, though his smile quickly returned brittle at the edges. Of course, Charles. If that's the case, then we'll consider the matter closed. But his eyes burned as they flicked to Isabella, promising this was far from over. The meeting adjourned. Executives shuffled out, murmuring to each other. Isabella remained seated, her hands clenched in her lap, her pulse still hammering. Charles lingered at the head of the table, his gaze on her. When the room finally emptied, he moved closer, lowering his voice. You handled yourself well, he said. I didn't say a word. Exactly. His eyes softened. Sometimes silence speaks louder than defense. She exhaled shakily, her chest tight. He's trying to destroy me. He won't. How can you be so sure? Charles hesitated, then leaned closer. Because I won't let him. The words were quiet, intimate, almost dangerous. They curled through her like a promise too fragile to name. That night, Isabella sat at her kitchen table, Malik asleep in the next room. Her laptop glowed with data, her notes scattered across the wood. She should have been exhausted. Instead, adrenaline coursed through her veins. Victor's attack had not been random. It was calculated. He knew she was getting close, and if Charles hadn't spoken, she might already be finished. She rubbed her temples, whispering to herself, "What am I doing here?" But the answer was Malik, the future she wanted for him. And she admitted silently for Charles, for the way he had stood for her when no one else would. The next day, she returned to the office determined, her chin lifted despite the whispers that trailed her steps. When she passed colleagues, she caught fragments. His pet project. Must be something between them. She won't last long. She ignored them, but they burrowed deep and sharp. By noon, she was summoned again, this time, not to the boardroom, but to Victor's office. The space was sleek, sterile, and cold. Victor sat behind his desk, steepling his fingers, his smile polished. "Miss Martin," he said, "I hope yesterday's misunderstanding didn't unsettle you." She said nothing. He leaned forward. "I'd hate to see someone of your circumstances lose such a rare opportunity. A child to raise, bills to pay. It would be unfortunate if this position suddenly slipped away." Her fists clenched. "Are you threatening me?" "Not at all." His smile widened. "I'm offering you advice. Stop digging. Close your files. If you do, perhaps things will remain comfortable." Her heart thundered. She wanted to scream, to tell him she would never bend. But Malik's face flashed in her mind, innocent, vulnerable. She rose, her voice trembling but firm. "Comfort is not worth the truth." His smile vanished for the first time. His eyes hardened. "You'll regret that," he said softly. That evening, Isabella delivered her findings to Charles in his office. She placed the folder on his desk, her hands still shaking. "He knows," she whispered. "He confronted me today. He told me to stop." Charles opened the folder, scanning the documents. His jaw tightened. "And what did you say?" "That comfort isn't worth the truth." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he closed the folder and looked at her, his gaze heavy with something unspoken. He said quietly, "That you're braver than most men I've ever met." Her breath caught. He reached out almost without thinking, his hand brushing against hers. The contact was fleeting, but it sent fire through her veins. She wanted to pull back, but she didn't. "You don't have to do this alone anymore," he said softly. Her chest ached with the weight of it, the danger, the whispers, the growing pull between them. And she realized with startling clarity that she already wasn't alone. But Victor was far from finished. 2 days later, during another executive review, he unveiled a new set of documents, evidence of falsified reports tied to Isabella's credentials. Spreadsheets, doctored numbers, altered signatures forged. "Here we are again," Victor said smoothly, sliding the papers across the table. "Our friend Miss Martin has been less than honest." The room shifted, eyes narrowing, whispers sparking. Isabella's chest tightened. She stared at the forged pages, her name printed like a curse. Before she could speak, Charles slammed his hand against the table. The sound cracked through the room like thunder. "These are lies." "Are you certain?" Victor's voice dripped with false innocence. "Or is it possible your trust has blinded you?" Charles rose to his feet, towering, his presence electric. "If you want to accuse someone, Hayes, then accuse me, because every move she's made has been under my direction. And if you think you can smear her to weaken me, you'll regret it." The room froze. Executives looked between them, tension rippling like a current. Victor's smile twisted, but his eyes flared with rage. The battle lines were no longer hidden. They were drawn in full view, and in the silence that followed, Isabella felt the shift. No matter what came next, Charles had chosen her side, and for the first time, she believed they might withstand the storm together. The days that followed felt like walking across glass. Isabella woke each morning with a weight in her chest, aware that whispers shadowed every step inside Genova Tech. She could hear them even when no one spoke, the rustle of rumors that spread too quickly, the clipped tones of colleagues who once smiled but now kept their distance. It was no longer just about Victor. The world outside had begun to take notice. On Tuesday morning, as Isabella stepped into the lobby, balancing Malik on her hip, a stranger in a dark coat snapped a photo of her. The click of the camera echoed louder than it should have, and before she could turn, he vanished into the crowd. Her stomach knotted. When she reached her office, her phone buzzed with a notification. A blog headline glared across the screen. "Who is Charles Garcia's mystery woman? Sources say she's more than just an employee." The article was cruel in its precision, filled with insinuations about favoritism, about impropriety, even about Malik. Words twisted into daggers, painting her as an opportunist who had clawed her way into Charles's circle for personal gain. Her hands shook as she set the phone down. She didn't need to ask who had fed the story. Later that afternoon, she sat in Charles's office, the article open on the desk between them. He had skimmed it, his jaw tightening with each line. "This is Hayes," he said flatly. "He's gone public." Isabella swallowed hard. "They mentioned Malik. They called him—" Her voice cracked. She couldn't repeat it. Charles closed the laptop with more force than necessary. His blue eyes burned with restrained fury. "He said they won't touch him." His voice low. "Sure. Not while I'm breathing." Her breath caught. She wanted to believe him, but the fear clawed too deeply. "Charles, this isn't just about the company anymore. It's personal. For me. For my son." "Maybe I should—" "Please don't say it," he interrupted sharply. She looked at him, startled. "Don't even think of stepping back," he said. "That's precisely what he wants, and I won't let him win that way." Her chest ached. "But your reputation—" He leaned forward, his gaze steady, unyielding. "My reputation means nothing compared to protecting you." The silence that followed was heavy, intimate. Isabella's throat tightened, words failing her. She only nodded, though her heart trembled with something too complex to name. Fear, gratitude, and something dangerously close to love. 2 nights later, Charles's name lit up across headlines. Billionaire Charles Garcia defends controversial hire. In a press conference meant to address quarterly performance reporters, had ambushed him with questions about Isabella. Cameras flashed, voices shouted, the chaos feeding on itself. And Charles, instead of dismissing it, had chosen his answer with deliberate clarity. She is a valued member of my team. Every responsibility she has taken on was at my instruction. And any attempt to discredit her is an attempt to discredit me. The room had fallen into stunned silence before the questions erupted again, fiercer than before. By dawn, the world knew Isabella's name. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth when she saw the footage. The man who had built an empire on control, who rarely allowed himself to be questioned, had just tied his reputation, his empire, to hers. Her heart ached with conflicting currents. Gratitude, fear, and beneath it all, an undeniable pull toward him that she could no longer deny, though she tried. That evening, when Charles arrived at her apartment unguarded, without his usual armor of assistants and schedules, she opened the door to him without hesitation. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I did," he said. His eyes softened as they lingered on her face, then shifted briefly to the room beyond where Malik played with a wooden train on the carpet. Isabella's chest tightened at the sight of Charles standing there entirely out of place in her small, warm apartment, yet somehow belonging more than anywhere else. "You've put yourself at risk," she murmured. He replied quietly, "That I've been at risk since I inherited this company. The difference is, now it matters." Her breath caught. She turned quickly, blinking back the sting in her eyes. "I don't know how to carry this weight, Charles. The whispers, the stares, the headlines. I've fought my whole life not to be a name in someone else's story." He stepped closer, his voice low. "Then let's write our own." For a moment the world stilled. She felt his presence behind her clothes, but not suffocating, steady, like the promise of shelter in a storm. But storms never rest. 2 days later, Isabella arrived at the office and found her workspace had been ransacked. Files that had been neatly stacked were scattered across the desk. Her laptop sat open, the screen frozen on an error message. Panic surged through her as she rifled through the folders. One in particular was gone, the folder containing the most damning evidence against Victor. Her breath caught. She looked around, but the office was empty, sterile, offering no answers. By the time Charles joined her, she was trembling. "It's gone," she whispered. "The files, the proof." He scanned the room, his expression hardening. This was no accident. He's escalated. Her chest tightened. "What do we do now?" His eyes locked on hers. "Now we fight smarter." That night, they sat side by side in Charles's penthouse, papers spread across the vast dining table. Malik slept in a guest room, which is safe for now. The city glittered beyond the glass walls, but neither looked at it. Isabella leaned her head into her hand, exhaustion dragging at her. Charles watched her silently, the sharp lines of his face softened by something unguarded. "You're stronger than you realize," he said quietly. She lifted her eyes to him, searching. "And you're gentler than you let anyone see." For a moment, neither looked away. The air between them thickened, charged. His hand moved toward hers, hesitated, then stopped. Her pulse raced. She wanted him to close the distance, yet feared what it might mean if he did. Instead, he said softly, "We'll get the files back. I won't let him take this from us." The way he said it lodged deep inside her. But as she drifted to sleep later that night, Isabella knew the war had reached a new stage. Victor had crossed from whispers to theft, from insinuations to sabotage. And though Charles stood beside her stronger than any storm, she feared the cost of what lay ahead. Because storms don't just break, they destroy. And love, when caught in the crossfire, is the most fragile thing of all. The storm broke, Not with thunder, but with headlines. Garcia Empire, under fire. Allegations of fraud. Surface. The news spread across every network, splashed across screens in Times Square, whispered in cafes, and debated in late-night talk shows. It was everywhere unstoppable, a tide that swallowed truth and rumor alike. Isabella stared at the television in the corner of her office, her face pale, her hands clutching the arms of her chair. The anchor's voice was mercilessly calm. Sources confirmed that documents leaked from within Genova Tech suggest financial tampering tied to Isabella Martin, a personal aide to Charles Garcia. Experts suggest the possibility of collusion, implicating Garcia himself in covering up corporate misconduct. Her stomach lurched. She didn't need to ask who had leaked the files. The forged numbers, the altered signatures, Victor's fingerprints were all over them. But to the world outside, they looked damning. And worst of all, her name was tied to every line. By the time Charles entered her office, the air felt suffocating. He closed the door behind him, his jaw tight, his eyes dark. "They've called for an investigation," he said flatly. "The board is demanding explanations. The press won't stop." Her throat tightened. "Charles." He raised a hand, silencing her. His voice was controlled, but beneath it simmered barely contained fury. This was his play all along. The theft wasn't about silencing us, it was about arming himself. And now he's turned the entire city against us. Her eyes burned. "Not us, Charles. Me. He's using me to ruin you. If I walk away now, maybe—" "No." His voice cracked like a whip. She flinched, startled by its force. Charles stepped closer, his eyes blazing. "Don't you dare say that again. You think leaving will save me, Isabella? You are the fight. Without you, none of this matters. You saw what he was doing when no one else dared to look. Can I undo that by myself?" Her voice trembled. "But I'm the reason they're tearing you apart." He softened. Then the sharpness in his eyes melting into something raw. "You're the reason I can stand it." The room went quiet. The hum of the city outside faded, leaving only the weight of his words between them. Isabella's heart pounded. She wanted to believe him and let the strength in his voice anchor her, but fear clawed too deeply. "What if we lose?" she whispered. Charles reached for her hand. His palm was warm, steady grounding. "Then we lose together." But the world outside showed no mercy. By evening, paparazzi swarmed the building. Cameras flashed, voices shouted, and questions cut through the air like knives. "Mr. Garcia. Are you covering up fraud? Miss Martin? How long have you been involved with him? Is your son?" Isabella froze at that last question. Malik's name twisted into something sordid, ugly. She tightened her grip on Charles's hand as security rushed them through the mob, but inside she was shaking. When the elevator doors closed behind them, she finally let out a strangled breath. "They're dragging Malik into this," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He's just a child." Charles's hand clenched into a fist. "They won't touch him. I'll make sure of it." But his eyes betrayed the truth. They couldn't control this storm. In the quiet of his penthouse that night, Isabella stood by the window, staring at the city that seemed to pulse with judgment. Lights flickered across skyscrapers. Headlines scrolled across screens, whispering her name. Charles approached quietly, his reflection merging with hers in the glass. "Talk to me," he said softly. Her throat tightened. "I don't belong in your world." He stilled. "I thought I could," she continued, her voice trembling. "I could walk beside you, fight beside you. But this is too big. I'm just a woman who sent a message to the wrong number. And you're—" her voice broke. "You're Charles Garcia, billionaire, untouchable, and now you're bleeding because of me." He stepped closer, his hand brushing her arm. Is that all you are to me? A mistake. An inconvenience. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I think I'm the weight that's going to drown you. His hand turned her gently toward him, forcing her eyes to meet his. His voice was low, fierce, unshakable. You are the reason I can breathe. The silence that followed was thick, fragile, alive. And then, as if pulled by gravity, his lips brushed hers, soft at first, then deeper, as though the world outside couldn't touch this single burning truth between them. When they parted, Isabella's breath shuddered. Charles. His forehead rested against hers, his voice barely a whisper. Let them tear me apart. I don't care. I won't let them take you. But Victor wasn't finished. 2 days later, subpoenas arrived. A legal investigation had been launched. Charles Garcia and Isabella Martin were officially under review for corporate misconduct. The papers lay heavy on Charles's desk, stamped with the seal of the federal courts. Isabella stood frozen as she read the words, the letters blurring through the tears she refused to shed. This is it, she whispered. He's won. Charles's jaw tightened, his hand covering hers on the document. No, he's overplayed his hand. And now we fight where it matters most. She looked at him, fear and hope warring in her chest. And if they believe him, his gaze didn't waver. Then we give them a reason to believe us instead. That night, long after Malik had been put to bed in the guest room, Isabella sat with Charles in the dim glow of the study. Papers surrounded them. Contracts, reports, fragments of evidence still in their possession. Her voice was quiet, fragile. Do you ever regret this? Did I send that message to you, that I walked into your world? He lifted his eyes from the papers, meeting hers with a steadiness that stole her breath. Every empire I've built, every dollar I've made, every room I've ever walked into, it all felt empty until you. Her chest constricted, her heart aching at the rawness of his words. Charles. He reached for her hand across the desk, his fingers lacing hers. You're not my mistake, Isabella. You're the only thing I'm certain of. But certainty would not shield them from the storm. The following morning, reporters camped outside their doors. Legal teams circled like vultures, and Victor's smile gleamed from every news clip as he denied involvement, painting himself as the savior of Genova Tech. And in the heart of it all, Isabella and Charles stood together, their fingers entwined, knowing the battle ahead would test their strength and the fragile, impossible love blooming between them. The breaking point had come, and beyond it lay either ruin or redemption. The courtroom was silent, yet alive with tension. Rows of journalists leaned forward, pens poised, cameras ready to flash at the slightest movement. On the far side, Victor Hayes sat with his attorneys, dressed immaculately in a dark suit, his smile sharp and smug, as if the verdict had already been written in his favor. At the defense table, Isabella sat beside Charles, her hands trembling beneath the polished oak surface. She tried to focus on breathing, on the slow rhythm Charles had whispered to her in the hallway before they entered. In through the nose, out through the mouth. One breath at a time. He sat beside her now, calm, and collected the picture of a billionaire, untouched by fear. Yet beneath the table, his hand pressed against hers, warm, firm, a lifeline anchoring her to the moment. The judge entered. The gavel struck. The reckoning began. The prosecution wasted no time. They unveiled the stolen documents and the forged evidence Victor had orchestrated, projecting them across the courtroom with the weight of irrefutable proof. To the untrained eye, it looked damning: financial irregularities tied directly to Isabella's name, contracts signed under Charles's authority. Whispers rippled across the room. Cameras flashed. Isabella's pulse thundered in her ears. Miss Martin, the prosecutor, said, his voice calm, calculated. Could you explain these discrepancies? Or perhaps admit to your role in covering up fraud? Her throat went dry. For a moment, words deserted her. The room blurred, the weight of judgment pressing down on her shoulders. But then Charles leaned closer, his voice low, steady. Truth doesn't need to shout. Just breathe, Isabella. She lifted her chin. These documents are forgeries, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the room. And I can prove it. Gasps echoed. The prosecutor arched a brow. Oh, and how would you do that? Her hand trembled as she reached into her briefcase. For weeks she had combed through every scrap of data, every trace Victor had overlooked in his arrogance. With Charles's resources and a handful of loyal allies, she had pieced together fragments of the original files. Now she laid them before the court contracts, with digital signatures traceable to Victor's devices, time-stamped logs that revealed tampering emails that showed his direct orders. A ripple of shock surged through the courtroom. Victor's smug smile faltered. The judge leaned forward, examining the documents. The prosecutor's face tightened. Charles's hand squeezed hers beneath the table, pride gleaming in his eyes. You see? Isabella continued, her voice steadier now, fueled by a fire she hadn't known she possessed. This wasn't about money. This was about power. Victor Hayes fabricated these lies to protect his corruption and to destroy anyone who threatened to expose him. The evidence unraveled like a thread pulled from a carefully woven fabric over hours. Witnesses testified that Charles's protection emboldened former employees and experts, confirmed the tampering. And slowly the tide shifted. Victor's composure cracked. Sweat gathered at his brow. His jaw clenched tighter with each revelation. He tried to object and twist the narrative, but the truth had become too loud and undeniable. The prosecution's case lay in ruins by the time closing arguments arrived. The judge delivered the verdict with the weight of finality. The court finds Isabella Martin and Charles Garcia not guilty of all charges. Furthermore, an investigation into Mr. Victor Hayes will proceed immediately. The gavel struck. It was over. The moment they stepped outside the courthouse, sunlight broke through the clouds, as if the city had been holding its breath. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, questions shouted. But Isabella barely heard them. She felt Charles's arm around her shoulders, steadying her, shielding her. She heard Malik's laughter as he ran into her arms, safe, untouched by the storm that had threatened to consume them. For the first time in months, she could breathe. That evening, the city seemed softer. The penthouse windows framed a skyline bathed in gold as the sun dipped low. Isabella stood on the balcony, the wind tugging at her curls, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Charles joined her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. He handed one to her, his fingers brushing hers. To survive, he said with a faint smile. She shook her head gently. No, Charles. To truth. They clinked glasses, the sound delicate, almost fragile. For a moment they stood in silence, watching the world below. Then, Isabella turned her eyes, searching his. You risked everything for me. For us. Why? His gaze softened, the walls he so carefully built around himself, crumbling in the fading light. Because somewhere between your first message and this moment, he said quietly, I realized everything I thought I wanted. Money, control, power meant nothing without you. Her breath caught. He continued, I don't want an empire, if it means standing alone at the top. I want this. You. Malik. The mess. The laughter. The life I never thought I deserved. Tears blurred her vision, but her smile trembled through them. Charles. Before she could finish, his lips found hers soft, insistent, with the promise of something greater than survival. It was a kiss that spoke of redemption, second chances, and love that had been tested and refused to break. When they parted, her forehead rested against his. "You're no longer untouchable, Charles Garcia," she whispered. "You're mine." He smiled, rare and unguarded. "And I wouldn't have it any other way." Downstairs, the city roared with its endless rhythm. But up here on the balcony where the stars were beginning to prick the night, Isabella and Charles stood wrapped in each other's arms, knowing that whatever storms came next, they would weather them together. Because love against all odds had become their empire. And just like Isabella and Charles discovered love can break through even the darkest storms. If their story touched you, let me know your favorite moment in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and follow the channel so you never miss the next journey of passion, resilience, and unexpected romance. Your support means the world. It's how stories like this continue to reach hearts everywhere.